I'm in Eaton Road, near the junction of Newmarket Road. Over there is the Ipswich Road. The three roads pretty much form the boundary of the town close estate, 111 acres that form a very important part of the history of the Freemen of Norwich. This large tract of land was granted to the mayor, aldermen and citizens of Norwich in 1524. But by who and why? That's a story that throws up another legendary name from history. Cardinal Wolsey, famous for being Henry VIII's most important minister, who only fell out of favour when he couldn't sort out a divorce for Henry from Catherine of Aragon. If we go all the way back to the 13th century, there had been much argument over grazing land. In 1272, there was a riot. I'm now on the Ipswich Road, effectively another boundary of the land that Cardinal Wolsey sorted out. This was the deal. The city would relinquish its rights to grazing over the Cathedral Priory's lands in Eton and Lakenham, the City Common as it was known, in return for which the Prior of the Cathedral would grant the citizens of Norwich this land, the 111 acres nowadays bordered by Ipswich, Newmarket and Eaton roads. There was a proviso: the land had to be enclosed. The town close estate had been created, and it was taken as read that it was for the use of the Freemen of Norwich. Except that it wasn't quite that straightforward. By now, freemen and citizens meant much the same thing, and, said the people, if the land was common to some, it was common to all. By 1840, it was becoming clear that the way ahead for the town close estate was to develop it into, and I quote, an attractive middle-class suburb. And that's pretty much what happened. Across some 4 phases of development, various houses and residences were built. Houses like this one here on Lime Tree Road, built in the 1870s by Robert Dawes. In many ways, the people who lived here by now were a snapshot of upper middle class Victorian society in Norwich. They were merchants and bankers. The chief clerk of Norwich Union Fire Office lived here, as did some comfortably off spinsters. It was all very nice. This was upward social mobility. And in a way, that's where the next problem started. With changes in society came the growing feeling that the beneficiaries of the town close estate should be all of the ratepayers of Norwich, and not just what was at least seen as an elite and not quite understood body of freemen. Inevitably, it got political. I'm at St Catherine's Plain in Norwich on the top of Queen's Road. It was here that a man called Orson Wilson had his business. He was a chemist and a well-known socialist. In December 1881, he instructed solicitors to serve notice on the city council to stop them distributing the income from the town close estate to the freemen, because, said Mr Wilson, that income belonged to all the citizens of Norwich. Initially, the freemen took little or no action. They'd heard it all before. But when they discovered that their income was to be frozen, they went to law. They assembled a formidable legal team, which included the noted Norfolk athlete, historian and lawyer Walter Rye. He carried out vast amounts of historical research, and when the case was heard in 1887, Mr Justice Kekewich upheld the freemen's case. Whilst this settled the question of who was entitled to the income from the estate, it left open the question of who was going to manage it. The city council weren't particularly interested. Their concern now was recouping their ratepayers' money that had been invested in the roads and sewers of this attractive middle-class suburb. Into the fray came the Charity Commission, relatively new, having been formed by an Act of Parliament in 1853. They too became embroiled in the legal arguments over whether or not the town close estate was a charity for the benefit of all ratepayers. Some, including Walter Rye, wanted to fight, but the freemen were losing their appetite for courtroom drama and worrying about legal costs. Finally, in 1892, the estate became a charity under the control of the Charity Commissioners for the benefit of the freemen alone. No one was particularly happy, but by 1907 the waters had settled. A Freemen's Committee was appointed to elect trustees to help run what by now was the Town Close charity. It was a turning point. In the years between the two world wars, the Norwich Freemen managed the estate well and increased the income to the Town Close Estate charity. That income would increase further when changes to the law, notably in the Leasehold Reform Act of 1967, led to the decision in 1980 to sell much of the residential property held by the estate and reinvest the capital in commercial property. The estate today embraces a school, a hotel, a tennis club and a large garden centre on the site of the old Daniels nurseries. It had been a wise strategy, and by the 1980s the charity's coffers had swelled. So it's from here that we can look at the Town Close Estate charity and the Freemen as the bodies they are today. But to go back for a moment, the 1960 Charities Act had empowered charities to engage more with local government to assist pensioners and make donations for educational purposes. As early as 1963, the Freemen had contributed to the University of East Anglia, for instance. They donated to the Maddermarket Theatre in the 1960s too. By the 1970s, after more legal changes, the Freemen were making educational grants to cover travel as well as social and physical training. With even more freedom in the 1980s, by which time restrictions on age and residency had been lifted, the Freemen decided to concentrate on educational charities. I'm at the offices of Norwich Charitable Trusts, from where today the Town Close Estate charity still provides pensions and financial assistance to freemen, their widows and children. Any extra income is used to make donations to charitable purposes within a 20-mile radius of Norwich Guildhall. As much as £500,000 has been distributed in 1 year.
We're focusing very much on adding value to the educational aspect. We often put money into a project on almost like a seed corn basis, just to get the show on the road and then enable other funders to come in, saying that's Town Close have gone in there, right, we should be in there as well. This particular year we're focusing again on the educational aspects. We've got some exciting stuff going on, novel stuff in the sense that we are providing help with, we're paying money to the museums so that they can actually open free for 10 days in July. We are very focused on what's happening now. We're starting the Great Norwich History Competition. We've got 4 schools all coming together to debate a particular provocation, a particular idea. It's going to be a very interesting year, I think, to raise people's awareness, to say, well, what are all these people? What do they do? Okay, they've been going for 700 years. What do they do now? How relevant is it to the future of Norwich? And that's what I'm hoping is going to be the outcome of all the activities that are taking place during the year.
Never more relevant than today is the role women play in the Freemen of Norwich, but that wasn't always the case.
Women, once they married, they lost the freedom. And widows, when they remarried, lost the freedom. But non-free women, if they were widowed, they actually inherited the freedom and the right to run their husband's business. But they were not formally admitted, so they don't appear in records. And that's more or less what happened generally, that women inherited the right to run the business. Now, what's emerged in sort of discussions with other medievalists and so on is that the importance that women didn't have political rights. A lot of men didn't either, but the freemen did have political rights. They had the right to vote in parliamentary elections and to vote in local elections. In local elections, it was only the freemen that voted. Other people also voted in the parliamentary elections. It might be that the Free Book, the Freemen's Register, sort of doubled up, especially in Norwich, where the freeman vote was so important. They doubled up as an electoral roll. And this is what we're thinking now, that sort of in the early days, it performed that task. And so it was very, very important. They knew exactly who was eligible for that. So, and they weren't the women. And of course, women didn't get the vote till 1918.
March 19th, 2010 was a significant moment, and leading campaigner Connie Adams, seen here with Sue Howes holding their certificates outside St Andrew's Hall that day, was fittingly first to be admitted to the Freedom on the day by virtue of being first in the alphabet.
I became a Freeman through my father. It was only about 7 years ago, where daughters of Freemen were given freedom. It was actually Rosa, my grandmother, who was one of the first women Freemen of the city in 2010. I always knew there was something special about being a Freeman, although my grandmother didn't talk about it that much. It was more about that was her brothers, and she actually wasn't involved, so she didn't actually tell me too much about what it meant to her.
It's also a point of pride for me that since I've been a Freeman, women have also been able to take up the freedom themselves in their own right.
As to the future of the Freemen, they meet every 5 years here at City Hall, just across the road from the ancient Guildhall that's been so much a part of this story. They meet in what's known as the Common Hall. It's where new members are elected. The next Common Hall is in 2020. The Lord Mayor will preside, and when the new Freemen leave, they will be carrying on this 700-year tradition of civic duty, community engagement and charitable work. The city has much to thank the Freemen of Norwich for. Back in 1832, in a time of great reform, the House of Lords had referred to the Freemen of Norwich as a valuable link to the past, and they still are. But with their good works and charitable deeds, they're very much thriving in the present, and they will continue to be a link to the future. This has been their story so far.
This year is the 700th anniversary. The purpose of all our celebrations this year are to raise the awareness of the Freemen of Norwich.
We've continued to go forward as a body, and these days we're in a situation where the Freemen actually still contribute tremendously, almost under the radar, with what's good about Norwich.
We provide significant support to the city, which has made a big difference to a lot of lives of the people of Norwich.
So all those things that the Freemen get involved in is something that makes me very proud to be a Freeman of the city of Norwich.
I'm really proud to be a Freeman. I hold it with great privilege. I love Norwich. It's a vibrant city, has a great arts and music scene, a strong independent business sector, and the Freemen have really helped with the commercial growth of the city.
The city of Norwich as it currently exists is largely due to all those years of when the city was being run by the Freemen. And in fact, it is really the core prosperity of the city deriving from that historical activity.